Shocking news. Trump is on the edge of the abyss. The president's approval rating has plummeted. Republicans are abandoning him en masse. This looks like a disaster. Has the politician been betrayed before the eyes of the world? The first details. The Ukrainian armed forces have made the Russian Ministry of Defense nervous. Evacuation has begun near Volgograd. The night in Russia turned into a real catastrophe. Strikes penetrated the heart of the army, paralyzing its capabilities. The Kremlin is on the brink of chaos. Russia's strength is coming apart at the seams. This is something you have to see. The UK is going all in. American weapons for Ukraine and a clear signal to the Kremlin. Putin is one step away from a trap. And all of this happened just now. Hello, I'm Darina Huskalo, and we're getting started. This is a real sensation. Donald Trump's rating has dropped to a critical point. According to The Hill, American support for the politician has been rapidly declining in recent months and has dropped below 37%, whereas a year ago it was at 47%. This is the lowest figure in the entire history of such measurements. America is in turmoil, and this can no longer be hidden. According to the New York Times, the polling company Gallup, which has been tracking approval of presidential elections for over 90 years and is one of the main indicators of public opinion in the US, will not be monitoring the race for the first time. This move by Gallup is reminiscent of their 2015 decision to stop polling during presidential elections, also known as horse race polling, which measured which candidate was leading in the run-up to the election. The media reports that Gallup's decision came amid loud threats from Trump against the press and lawsuits against several media giants, as well as at least one pollster, which have been swirling in recent years. However, it's not all that straightforward. Criticism is raining down on the American, and tensions in the country have flared to the limit. The White House can no longer afford to be at ease. Another blow to the president. The U.S. House of Representatives has voted against the tariffs on Canadian goods imposed by Trump. A storm of criticism is directed at the leadership. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a resolution against the tariffs on Canadian goods imposed by President Donald Trump, sharply criticizing the administration for starting a trade war with its northern neighbor. The resolution was supported by 219 congressmen, including 6 members of the Republican Party. A slap in the face to the American leader in front of everyone. Trump was not prepared for this. His favorite economic trump card, import tariffs, is falling apart before his eyes, and with the help of his own party members no less. In the end, Donald himself couldn't hold back. He threatened the Republican congressman who dared to support the resolution, hinting at serious consequences. The political storm is unfolding in full force. The battle for survival continues. Doctors have already done the impossible to help the severely wounded hero, but ahead lies not just recovery, but a series of complex surgeries. You can find all the details on how to help our defender in the description below the video. Urgent news, there's real hell breaking out near Volgograd. The arsenal of the main missile and artillery directorate of the Russian Ministry of Defense is on fire. Belousov is tearing his hair out. The heart of the Russian army's ammunition stockpile is burning.
There, my dear. There they are, the explosions, there they are. That's exactly what I'm telling you about.
According to preliminary information, the territory of military unit 5,722,951 in the village of Kotluban is on fire. According to open sources, this military unit is a large arsenal for comprehensive ammunition storage, one of the key depots where supplies for the Russian army were stockpiled.
Kotluban is being urgently evacuated. The Kremlin's deep rear has suddenly become the front line. This is how the much-vaunted Russian army supply system is coming apart at the seams. The governor of the Volgograd region, Bocharov, claims it was a missile attack. Russian monitoring channels report that drones were also flying there. As we can see, the occupiers can only dream of peace. In addition, various reports circulating online indicate that the Progress plant, which produces specialized aircraft equipment and precision missiles in Michurinsk, located within the Tambov region, was also attacked. Why, what exactly happened there?
Well, look, like on camera.
As a result of the work of Russian air defense, a supermarket and a college caught fire. Social media is abuzz with reports of a fire near the railway as well. The city's life is being put on hold in an emergency. Now, the Komi Republic is also not in the mood for entertainment. Lukoil oil refinery. Ukta, the oil refinery, caught fire like a match.
The refinery is burning. 3 drones.
Everything here is just complete and total chaos.
Ukrainian armed forces drones keep setting new records. More than 2,000 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. It seems our guys definitely won't stop here.
There it goes, there it goes, there it goes. It's flying. What's it carrying?
Shockingly, the UK has finally made up its mind. Support for Ukraine is reaching a new level. London has agreed to purchase American weapons for the Ukrainian armed forces. I
am pleased to confirm that the UK is allocating £150 million for the Pearl program. Together, we must provide Ukraine with the critically important air defense it needs in response to Putin's brutal onslaught. As
Politico notes, this move by the United Kingdom reflects increased pressure on NATO members to join the scheme, since some countries such as Norway, the Netherlands and Germany have already disproportionately increased their contributions. The day before, official London shocked everyone with another high-profile statement. Now it plans to supply Ukraine with ballistic missiles capable of reaching Moscow. The media have already leaked the first shocking details.
Nightfall missiles will carry 200-kilogram warheads and have a range of 310 miles. That's enough to strike Moscow from the battlefield.
Among other features, the missiles will have warheads of up to 200 kilograms, high accuracy, the ability to be launched from various platforms, and enhanced resistance to electronic warfare measures.
A safe Europe needs a strong Ukraine. These new British long-range missiles will allow Ukraine to stay in the fight and give Putin yet another reason to worry.
London is already holding a competition for the rapid development of the announced weaponry. The first 3 missiles are to be produced within 12 months for testing, and contract signings are expected in March this year. Production could reach up to 10 missiles per month. Nightfall will be almost independent of foreign components, which will allow decisions on its transfer to Ukraine to be made more quickly. At this very moment, France is taking a hard line. Modern fighter jets for Kyiv are already in the air. Mirages, Rafales and Gripens now sound less like revenge for Russia. Ukraine is tightening the screws on the enemy in the skies. Putin's old schemes no longer work. The sky is gradually becoming a zone controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine. Paris is making a long-term bet. For the Kremlin, this is a very alarming signal. Is this really the end? Don't miss more about this coming up. Anti-ballistic missiles, guided aerial bombs, and a new batch of Mirage 2000 aircraft.
The French side has announced preparations to transfer Mirage 2000 aircraft to Ukraine. They also discussed speeding up the delivery of aircraft and continuing work on record volumes of AASM Hammer-guided aerial bombs. At the same time, cooperation continues on the supply and accelerated production of Aster missiles. They separately discussed the provision of long-range strike capabilities, in particular Scalp missiles.
The new package of French military aid to the armed forces of Ukraine must be recognized as significant. But I would like to talk separately about the Mirages.
these aircraft date back to the last millennium, but they remain highly effective and reliable combat platforms that continue to perform vital missions. At this point, they are mainly used for launching so-called gliding aerial bombs, which are jet-powered systems, much like the sophisticated French Hammer precision-guided bombs we see today. A good bomb, which is basically high precision and allows you to strike Russian military targets dozens of kilometers behind the front line. Plus, this aircraft has avionics that provide good visibility against the ground. In other words, something our old aircraft, the MiG-29 and Su-27, cannot do. After all, the radars have poor filters, which makes it hard to distinguish objects from the ground. But the Mirages have good radars. They can see well against the background of both land and water.
As for the number of Mirages that might be involved, there are no specific figures. But there are assumptions about how many aircraft Ukraine might receive from France. So
I think right now they're completing the first squadron for us, delivering them in pairs, in flights. The first squadron should arrive soon, meaning we should have up to 12 Mirages in the near future. And then, of course, they'll form a second squadron depending on the delivery capabilities. Besides
that, earlier Zelensky announced the purchase of 150 Gripen fighters and 100 Rafales. In
2035, the delivery timelines are clearly specified. The point is that at the moment, the French side is capable of producing up to 3 Rafales per month. Currently, the issue is about increasing Rafale production to 5 units per month. And
here arises the question, will Ukraine actually need these particular aircraft in 10 to 15 years?
So if we're talking about squadrons, it would actually be better to buy them in 15 years. That's what's important here. Right now, of course, we need Gripens. And Gripens, again, how many Gripens are we talking about? 2 squadrons, that is a brigade. Again, the same brigade as with the Mirages, let's say 24 aircraft. So we need 24 Gripens in order for them to handle the maximum number of tasks. For standard tasks, even a single squadron, 12 aircraft would be enough. Well, they usually add 2 more aircraft as reserves, maybe as a backup. So let's say 14 or 15 aircraft, that would be enough. It's the same story with the Rafales. So right now we need at least a squadron, but ideally a brigade of those same Rafales. That means the number of aircraft would be up to 50 at most, but definitely not 250, even in 15 years. In 15 years, since unmanned aviation is developing, we will need 250 heavy drones like the Kizilelma. Right now, there's the Turkish Mayus project. They're looking ahead.
they're not buying, for example, those same Gripens or Rafales for themselves. And why is that? Because looking ahead, in the future, 90% of practical tasks will be carried out by drones, heavy drones that aren't limited by the physiological needs of a human, meaning a pilot.
But still, when it comes to purchasing these aircraft, the question arises as to whether Ukraine will be able to afford it financially.
There's another key point, the cost of the Rafale. Everything will depend on their price. And the price currently being quoted by the French side is about 200 million. So again, the question is whether we will be sold at the prices for domestic customers, that is, for the French armed forces, where the price is much lower, or whether it will be accordingly under an international contract. And international contracts are over 200 million euros. These are significant amounts. At the moment, the deal is being discussed at a level of up to 50 billion euros. That's a substantial sum, and accordingly the question will be whether the Ukrainian side has the necessary funds. So it's not even about whether France has the aircraft available.
At the same time, if everything works out with such a number of fighter jets, Ukraine could enter the top 10 countries in the world in terms of air force strength and become one of the strongest in Europe.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Right now, Kazakhstan is openly refusing to play by the Kremlin's rules. Astana is demonstratively distancing itself from Moscow. The Russian language is losing its monopoly and being thrown into the trash. For the Kremlin, this is a painful slap in the face. Another piece of the post-Soviet space is slipping out of its hands. Propaganda is screaming at the top of its lungs. The start of the so-called special military operation in Central Asia is teetering on the edge. Whether an explosion will happen, more on that in just a moment.
A new round in the covert standoff between Kazakhstan and Russia. Vastanev Dali dedicates the sacred Russian imperialist Putinists to the Russian language. Russia's neighbors have decided to completely change their constitution. Kazakhstani politicians have called this process a revision of the state's architecture. The draft of the new regulations includes changes to the structure of parliament and a distinction between the rights of citizens and foreigners. The central ideas of the main document are named as education and science, culture and innovation. But the most discussed amendment, which was picked up by Russian media, is the change in the wording regarding the Russian language.
The Commission on Constitutional Reform in Kazakhstan has introduced amendments to the draft of the new constitution. As a result of the changed wording, the Russian language will be used not on an equal footing with Kazakh, but alongside it, despite claims that the amendment is merely editorial and stylistic in nature. Its true meaning will only become clear in practice.
Astana began distancing itself from Moscow immediately after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The presidents of both countries often resorted to diplomatic maneuvering. Sometimes Putin would forget Tokayev's patronymic, while Kassym-Jomart would suddenly force seasoned Russian diplomats to scramble for headphones for simultaneous translation.
First of all, dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, I would like to express my gratitude. Today you have come to Kazakhstan on an official visit, accepting my invitation. And
In interviews and during joint events before a huge audience, the president of Kazakhstan was not shy about reminding everyone that a Kazakh is not a younger brother to Russians. And the quasi-unions that appeared on the world map with the help of the Russian army, they do not recognize them.
In Russia, some individuals are testing this situation, claiming that Russia saved Kazakhstan and that Kazakhstan must now always serve and bow down to Russia. I believe that these are completely unjustified notions, you could say, far from reality. But
it has generally been calculated that if the right of nations to self-determination were actually implemented across the entire globe, then instead of the 193 countries that currently make up the United Nations, there would be more than 500 or 600 countries on Earth. Of course, for this reason, we do not recognize either Taiwan or Kosovo or South Ossetia or Abkhazia. And by all appearances, this principle will be applied in relation to the classical state territory, which in our view is Luhansk and Donetsk.
After Russia's full-scale invasion, Kazakhstan became essential to Moscow, since it is through its territory that huge volumes of parallel imports enter the country. The country shares the longest land border in the world, over 7,500 kilometers. And although Tokayev's administration is effectively helping the Russians wage war, as Russian propagandists keenly note, it is increasingly sending signals either to China or to the West. That is why from time to time Astana receives threats of a so-called special military operation.
Problems in our Asia, in Central Asia as it's called, this could become a gigantic problem for us. And we need to very clearly define our goals and objectives. We need to make it clear, the games are over. We don't care about international law or the international order. If, for our national security, we needed to launch the special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, then why, based on the same considerations, can't we start a special military operation in other points within our sphere of influence?
It is possible that we may find it necessary to comprehensively formulate our national doctrine and explicitly and definitively articulate exactly what our rightful geopolitical sphere of influence is.
Listen, let's still pay attention to the fact that the next problem is Kazakhstan. Because the same, Nazi processes could start there as well. Right now, we are in Ukraine.
As for the fact that northern Kazakhstan, where about 2 million ethnic Russians live, is a potential time bomb in the hands of the Kremlin, Kyiv understands this even without Solovyov's threats. Local residents, especially those of retirement age, still absorb Russian propaganda. Throughout this very specific period of time, in history.
Who do you support in the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Russia, of course. And why is that? Because Russia is Russia.
How can Russia be the aggressor? It is kind, it is fair, and it helps every single person.
It was right here in northern Kazakhstan in 2023 that 36 supporters of the Russian world tried to declare their autonomy from the center with the intention of later joining Russia. The local authorities quickly dispersed the separatist group. The participants received up to 7 years in prison. Moreover, a campaign to resettle Kazakhs has begun in Kazakhstan. Supposedly, this is to revive villages in the north. We
arrived in the village of Podgornoye, which is probably about half an hour's drive from Petropavlovsk. And it was built specifically for immigrants who are brought from the south of the country to the north, but by the way, from abroad too. From
Mongolia.
From Mongolia?
Yes.
They gave us one of these houses plus a 250,000 tenge as a down payment. Of course, it wasn't easy, but we made the decision as a family. There are 7 of us, mother, father, and 5 children.
In addition, the authorities of Kazakhstan have stopped turning a blind eye to their citizens' participation in the war against Ukraine on Russia's side. In 2025, a record 709 cases were opened in the country for participation and 28 for mercenarism. At the same time, Kazakhstan willingly extradites Russian military personnel who have deserted to its territory back to Moscow. Tokayev is doing everything he can to maintain a balance with the Kremlin and to navigate the sentiments of his own population.
This is a real turnaround. Brussels is ready to change the rules for Ukraine's sake. The doors to the EU may open sooner than even the optimists expected. Hungary is getting nervous, the Kremlin is losing influence, and the stakes are rising rapidly. The process has been set in motion, and stopping it will not be easy. The main question is, will the West see it through to the end? The unvarnished truth is in the following report.
Ukraine may get a seat at the European table even before it fulfills the entire list of requirements for full membership. According to politicians, Brussels is discussing an unprecedented plan that would allow Kyiv to partially join the European Union as early as 2027. This is not just a political gesture of support, but an attempt to finally pull Ukraine out of the gray zone between East and West and to close Moscow's window of influence over the country's future.
In a variety of specific sectors and regions, Ukraine will gradually become much closer to the European Union, and certain further comprehensive European Union legislative standards and regulatory norms will be introduced. This strategic integration will allow Ukraine to align itself more closely with the EU. And, on the other hand, it will simultaneously allow the European Union to maintain a greater level of oversight and control over Ukraine's internal developments. Because this is about allocating money for reconstruction.
For the first time, the European Union is considering an option in which a country gains access to the EU's institutional space not at the end, but at the very beginning of the process. In Brussels, this is unofficially called reverse enlargement, when reforms continue but the political decision is made in advance.
EU officials consider this idea attractive as it would give Kyiv a respite to complete reforms of democratic institutions, the judicial and political systems, while simultaneously reducing the likelihood that the country will lose hope of joining and turn away from the West, writes Politico.
According to the basis of this plan, as Politico writes, there are 5 steps, each of which is intended to bring Ukraine closer to the European Union faster than previous non-enlargement rules allowed. The first is accelerated preparation. The EU has already provided Kyiv with recommendations on 3 out of 6 negotiation clusters and is preparing to open work on the others in the coming months. The second element is the so-called light membership format. This is not a second-rate status, EU officials assure, but rather a step-by-step accession process. First comes political participation and access to key decisions, then a gradual expansion of rights.
But what needs to be clearly stated there is when Ukraine can expect EU membership, and not just stated, but there must be a clear roadmap. Secondly, we need to realistically understand how these clusters will be negotiated with Hungary's position in mind.
And here we come to the most painful third point. To admit a new member, the approval of all 27 EU countries is required. And Prime Minister Viktor Orban remains the main opponent of Ukraine's integration. In Brussels, it is openly acknowledged that his position is unlikely to change before the Hungarian elections. That is why European capitals are closely monitoring the domestic political situation in Budapest, viewing a change of power as a possible window to unblock the decision.
The European Union is currently trying to undergo a process of internal reform, carefully considering the specific challenges posed by nations like Hungary and Slovakia. Where these problematic veto rights still exist, we can see how Europe is now trying, specifically the European Union, as we clearly know from their most recent official statements. They are actively seeking ways to circumvent or bypass this veto right entirely.
The fourth step of the plan is to rely on external pressure. In Brussels, they believe that it is the President of the United States who can influence Orban. In the draft peace plan of 20 points, Ukraine's accession to the EU in 2027 is already mentioned. If Donald Trump decides to see the deal through, a phone call to Budapest could be decisive. And finally, the last extreme option is Article 7 of the EU Treaty. It provides for stripping a country of its voting rights. This is the harshest instrument of pressure. For now, they do not want to use it so as not to strengthen Orban's position within Hungary. But in Brussels, they no longer rule out that if the blockade continues, this trump card may be played. However, we shouldn't harbor any illusions. The 5-step plan is not a guarantee of membership, nor is it a quick end to the war. But it is an attempt to cement the irreversibility of Ukraine's European choice. Exactly at that very specific moment in time.
On this note, we conclude our broadcast. We will continue to monitor the most important events right now to be the first to tell you about them. Don't forget to subscribe. See you.